Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person you'd forget in a crowd. At 28, she stood average height with brown hair that she kept in a simple ponytail most days. Her clothes were practical, dark pants, plain shirts, and boots that had seen better days. Nothing about her screamed special or extraordinary. She worked as a supply coordinator for the Terran Defense Force, spending her days making sure ammunition, food, and medical supplies reached the right places at the right times. The war against the Zephyrian Empire had been going on for 3 years now. Most humans had never seen a Zephyrian in person, but everyone knew what they looked like from the news broadcasts. They were tall, elegant beings with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Their technology was superior to humanity's in almost every way. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their armor nearly impenetrable. The only reason humanity hadn't been wiped out completely was because the Zephyrians seemed to view the war as more of an amusing exercise than a serious threat. Sarah's job kept her on Outpost 47, a small military installation on the edge of human space. The outpost served as a supply depot and communication hub for the frontline forces fighting deeper in contested territory. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important. Without people like Sarah making sure everything ran smoothly, the soldiers on the front lines would run out of ammunition or food within days. Most of her colleagues barely noticed her. She arrived on time, did her job efficiently, and went home to her small quarters without much social interaction. During lunch breaks, she'd sit by herself reading old books on a tablet. When others talked about the war or shared stories from the front lines, Sarah would listen politely but rarely contributed to the conversation. Commander Rodriguez, the outpost's leader, appreciated Sarah's reliability but didn't think much about her beyond that. In his reports to headquarters, he'd mention her as competent and dependable, but never as anything special. She was exactly the type of background personnel that kept the military machine running without anyone paying much attention to how or why. The other supply coordinators sometimes tried to include Sarah in their conversations, but she always seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. When they asked about her background, she'd give short answers. She'd grown up on Earth, went to a standard education center, and joined the military because she wanted to help with the war effort. Nothing unusual or interesting. What nobody knew was that Sarah had a secret she'd been carrying her entire life. Even she didn't fully understand it. Sometimes, when she was alone and thought nobody was watching, strange things would happen around her. Lights would flicker without reason. Electronic devices would work better when she touched them. Small objects would move slightly when she stared at them intensely. She'd learned early in childhood to hide these incidents. The few times she'd mentioned them to adults, they'd dismissed her claims or suggested she was imagining things. Eventually, Sarah stopped talking about the strange occurrences altogether. She convinced herself that everyone probably experienced similar things and just didn't talk about them. The war changed everything for humanity. Before the Zephyrians arrived, humans had been exploring space at a leisurely pace, establishing colonies and trading posts throughout a small region of the galaxy. They'd encountered a few other species, but most were either less advanced than humans or uninterested in contact. Humanity had grown comfortable thinking they were reasonably well developed compared to their galactic neighbors. Then the Zephyrian Empire made contact, and humanity realized how naive they'd been. The Zephyrians had been watching human expansion for decades. They found human technology primitive and human society chaotic. When they finally revealed themselves, it wasn't for peaceful trade or cultural exchange. They delivered an ultimatum: submit to Zephyrian rule or be eliminated. Humanity, of course, chose to fight. It was a decision that surprised many other galactic species, who typically surrendered immediately when faced with Zephyrian superiority. But humans had something the Zephyrians hadn't expected: stubbornness. Even when outgunned and outmaneuvered, human forces kept fighting. They adapted quickly, used unconventional tactics, and refused to give up even when facing impossible odds. The Zephyrians found this amusing at first. They could have ended the war quickly if they'd wanted to, but human resistance entertained them. It was like watching insects try to fight off a boot. They decided to draw out the conflict, treating it as a form of recreation while slowly wearing down human resistance. Sarah had joined the military 6 months after the war began. She'd been working as a logistics coordinator for a civilian shipping company, but when the military desperately needed people with organizational skills, she'd volunteered. Her supervisors had been impressed with her ability to track complex supply chains and solve distribution problems, so they'd assigned her to increasingly important positions. Outpost 47 was her third assignment, and by far the most critical. The outpost supported 12 different frontline units spread across 4 star systems. Every day, Sarah processed requests for everything from rifle ammunition to medical bandages to replacement parts for damaged vehicles. She worked with shipping schedules, transport capacity limits, and priority classifications to make sure the most urgent supplies reached their destinations first. Her colleagues respected her competence, but they found her personality puzzling. Sarah never seemed stressed, even when dealing with emergency supply requests or critical shortages. She'd calmly work through problems that would send other coordinators into panic. When transport ships were delayed or destroyed by Zephyrian raids, Sarah would quickly reorganize delivery schedules without showing any sign of frustration. "She's like a machine," one of her co-workers once said. "I've never seen her get upset or excited about anything." What they didn't realize was that Sarah felt everything very intensely. She cared deeply about the soldiers depending on her supplies. When she heard reports about units running low on ammunition or medical supplies, it affected her emotionally. But somewhere along the way, she'd learned to channel those feelings into focused determination rather than visible stress. The strange incidents that had followed Sarah since childhood had become more frequent since she'd joined the military. Electronic systems seemed to respond better when she was operating them. Her computer terminal rarely crashed, while others dealt with constant technical problems. Communication equipment worked more clearly when Sarah was nearby. She'd started to wonder if the stress of the war was somehow amplifying whatever was different about her. But Sarah kept these observations to herself. The military had enough problems without personnel reporting mysterious phenomena. She focused on her job and tried to ignore the growing sense that something significant was building inside her. 3 months into her assignment at Outpost 47, Sarah received a priority communication that would change everything. Command Headquarters was requesting detailed supply reports from all outposts to plan for a major offensive operation. The reports needed to include not just current inventory levels, but projected consumption rates, transportation bottlenecks, and contingency plans for supply line disruption. It was exactly the type of complex analytical work Sarah excelled at. She spent 2 weeks gathering data, running calculations, and preparing comprehensive reports. Her analysis revealed several critical vulnerabilities in the current supply network, along with specific recommendations for addressing them. When Sarah submitted her reports, they quickly made their way up the command chain. Senior officers were impressed with the thoroughness and insight of her analysis. For the first time since joining the military, Sarah's work was attracting attention from high-ranking officials. What nobody expected was that this attention would lead to a request that would put Sarah directly in harm's way. The upcoming offensive operation needed a supply coordinator who could work directly with frontline commanders to manage resource allocation in real time. Based on her reports, Headquarters decided Sarah was the best person for the job. Commander Rodriguez called Sarah into his office to deliver the news. "Martinez, you're being reassigned to Operation Breakthrough. You'll be working directly with the assault forces to coordinate supply deliveries during active combat operations." Sarah listened to the details without changing expression, but inside she felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She'd never been anywhere near actual combat. Her job had always kept her safely behind the lines, managing logistics from secure installations. Now she was being asked to work in the middle of a war zone. "When do I leave?" she asked. "Transport arrives tomorrow morning. You'll have 6 hours to pack and prepare." Rodriguez paused, studying Sarah's calm reaction. "Martinez, this isn't a normal supply coordination job. You'll be operating in contested space where Zephyrian forces are actively trying to disrupt our operations. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand the risks." But as she left the commander's office and headed back to her quarters to pack, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment would reveal things about herself she wasn't prepared to face. The strange incidents had been growing stronger and more frequent. Being placed in a high-stress combat situation might trigger something she couldn't control or hide. That night, as Sarah packed her belongings, she found herself staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her desk. She looked exactly the same as always, completely ordinary. But she could feel something changing inside her, like a pressure building that would eventually need to be released. Tomorrow, she would leave the safety of Outpost 47 and join the most dangerous military operation humanity had ever attempted. She had no idea that within days, footage from the front lines would reveal something about her that would shock not just the human military command, but change the entire course of the war against the Zephyrian Empire. The transport ship that carried Sarah to the front lines was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Instead of the comfortable passenger vessels used for routine transfers, this was a military assault transport designed to get personnel into combat zones quickly and quietly. The interior was cramped, with fold-down seats and minimal lighting. 26 other specialists were making the same journey: engineers, medics, communications experts, and tactical advisors who would support Operation Breakthrough. Sarah found herself sitting next to Lieutenant Commander Zhang, a veteran logistics officer who would be coordinating supply efforts for the entire operation. Zhang had been fighting the Zephyrians since the war began and had the scarred hands and tired eyes to prove it. "First time in a combat zone?" Zhang asked, noticing Sarah's equipment was all pristine and unmarked. "Yes, sir." Zhang nodded thoughtfully. "The briefings don't prepare you for what it's actually like out there. Zephyrian forces don't just attack our military units, they target supply lines, communication networks, anything that keeps us organized. Your job is going to be more dangerous than you think." Sarah absorbed this information without comment. She'd studied the operational parameters, but Zhang was right that reading reports was different from experiencing combat firsthand. As the transport ship approached the staging area for Operation Breakthrough, she tried to prepare herself mentally for whatever was coming. The staging area was a massive military complex built around an asteroid mining station. Hundreds of ships filled the surrounding space: assault vessels, supply transports, medical frigates, and communication platforms. It was the largest human military force ever assembled, representing nearly 40% of humanity's remaining fleet strength. When Sarah disembarked from the transport, she was immediately struck by the intensity of activity around her. Personnel moved with urgent purpose, loading supplies, checking equipment, and reviewing tactical data. The air hummed with energy and tension. This wasn't the routine atmosphere of Outpost 47. This was preparation for a battle that could determine humanity's survival. Sarah reported to the command center, where she was briefed on her specific role in the operation. Operation Breakthrough was an attempt to capture a Zephyrian supply depot that intelligence suggested was critical to their regional military operations. If successful, the raid would not only disrupt Zephyrian logistics, but also provide humanity with access to advanced alien technology. The operation would unfold in 3 phases. First, human forces would establish a beachhead around the target system. Second, assault teams would neutralize Zephyrian defenses and secure the depot. Third, engineering teams would extract as much technology and information as possible before Zephyrian reinforcements arrived. Sarah's job was to coordinate supply deliveries to assault teams during the second phase. She would be stationed aboard the command vessel Determination, monitoring resource consumption and directing supply ships to wherever they were needed most urgently. It sounded straightforward enough, but Sarah could see from the tactical displays that the operation would be incredibly complex, with dozens of moving parts that could go wrong. The assault fleet departed the staging area 18 hours later. Sarah spent the journey studying personnel rosters, supply inventories, and communication protocols. She wanted to be completely prepared when the shooting started. Around her, other specialists made similar preparations, reviewing technical manuals and testing equipment. As they approached the target system, long-range sensors began detecting Zephyrian forces. The enemy had a significant presence around the depot, more than intelligence estimates had suggested. Admiral Morrison, the operation commander, made the decision to proceed anyway. Humanity had committed too many resources to turn back now. The first phase of the operation began with a coordinated assault on Zephyrian patrol ships. Human forces had learned to use swarm tactics against Zephyrian vessels, overwhelming individual ships with multiple attackers. The strategy worked, but at a cost. Humanity lost nearly 30 ships in the opening engagement. Sarah watched the battle unfold from the command center of the Determination, tracking ammunition consumption and damage reports from assault vessels. The intensity of combat was unlike anything she'd read about in reports. Ships were requesting resupply within minutes of engaging the enemy. Medical frigates were already operating at capacity treating wounded personnel. "Martinez!" Lieutenant Commander Zhang called from across the command center. "Assault Group Charlie is reporting critical ammunition shortages. They need resupply in the next 20 minutes, or they'll have to withdraw." Sarah quickly analyzed the tactical situation. Assault Group Charlie was engaged with a Zephyrian defense platform and couldn't disengage safely. The nearest supply vessel was 40 minutes away, too far to help, but there was another option that would be extremely risky. "Sir, Supply Transport 7 is carrying the right ammunition types, but they'd have to cross through an active combat zone to reach Charlie Group." Zhang studied the tactical display. "The Zephyrians would target them immediately. Supply transports can't survive in active combat." Sarah continued analyzing the data, looking for alternatives. As she focused on the problem, something strange began happening around her workstation. The displays became brighter and clearer. Data processing seemed to accelerate, showing her information faster than the computer systems should have been capable of providing. "Wait!" Sarah said, staring at the tactical display with intense concentration. "There's a debris field from the destroyed patrol ships. If Transport 7 follows this route, the debris should provide partial concealment from Zephyrian sensors." She traced the proposed route with her finger on the display, and as she did, the tactical computer began highlighting additional details she hadn't noticed before. Safe corridors through the debris field appeared on screen, marked with probability calculations for successful transit. Zhang leaned over to examine Sarah's analysis. "How did you calculate these probability numbers? The tactical computer doesn't normally provide this level of detail." Sarah looked at the display, surprised. The probability calculations were indeed there, but she didn't remember entering the parameters to generate them. I must have run the analysis automatically while I was thinking about the problem." Zhang appeared skeptical, but didn't have time to investigate further. "Send the route to Transport 7. If you're wrong, we'll lose a supply ship and Charlie Group will have to retreat." "I understand, sir." Sarah transmitted the navigation data to Transport 7, and the supply vessel immediately began following her suggested route. She watched nervously as the transport moved through the debris field, expecting Zephyrian forces to detect and attack it at any moment. But the transport made it through safely, delivering critical ammunition to Assault Group Charlie just as their weapons were running empty. The assault group was able to continue their attack on the defense platform, eventually destroying it and clearing the way for the second phase of the operation. The success of Sarah's improvised supply run caught the attention of other command staff. For the rest of the first phase, officers began specifically requesting her analysis of difficult logistical problems. Each time, Sarah found herself able to see solutions that weren't obvious to others, often involving complex calculations that seemed to appear on her displays without her conscious input. As the fleet transitioned into the second phase of the operation, Sarah realized the strange phenomena that had followed her throughout life were becoming much stronger. Electronic systems responded to her thoughts as much as her conscious commands. Data appeared on her screens that she hadn't specifically requested, but always seemed relevant to whatever problem she was trying to solve. The second phase began with assault shuttles launching toward the Zephyrian depot. Sarah monitored their progress from the command center, tracking fuel consumption, ammunition expenditure, and casualty reports. The depot was heavily defended, and human forces were taking significant losses trying to establish a foothold. Martinez, "We're getting reports of equipment failures from multiple assault teams," Zhang called. "Their communication systems are malfunctioning, and some of their weapons have stopped working entirely. Can you identify the problem?" Sarah pulled up technical reports from the affected units. As she studied the data, her workstation displays began showing diagnostic information she'd never seen before. Equipment schematics appeared with highlighted problem areas. Repair procedures scrolled across secondary monitors. "Sir, it looks like the Zephyrians are using some kind of electromagnetic interference weapon. It's disrupting our electronic systems, but I think I can compensate for it." Sarah began entering commands into her workstation, but as she worked, she realized she wasn't just typing. Somehow her thoughts were directly interfacing with the computer systems. She could feel the electronic networks around her responding to her mental commands, adjusting communication frequencies and modifying equipment calibrations. Across the fleet, communication systems began working again. Weapons that had stopped functioning came back online. Assault teams reported that their equipment problems were resolving. "How did you do that?" Zhang asked, staring at Sarah with new interest. Sarah looked at her hands, which were still resting on the keyboard, even though she'd stopped typing several minutes ago. "I'm not sure. I just focused on fixing the problems, and the solutions seemed obvious." Zhang was about to respond when alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Long-range sensors had detected a large Zephyrian reinforcement fleet approaching the system, much larger than intelligence had predicted. "All units, prepare for immediate withdrawal," Admiral Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "Operation Breakthrough is being terminated. We cannot engage a force of that size." But as the human fleet began preparing to retreat, disaster struck. The Zephyrian reinforcements had arrived ahead of schedule and were already engaging the outer perimeter of human ships. Several vessels were trapped between the enemy reinforcements and the heavily defended depot, unable to withdraw safely. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing horror. Nearly 2,000 human personnel were about to be captured or killed, and there was nothing the fleet could do to help them. The trapped ships didn't have enough fuel or ammunition to fight their way out, and any rescue attempt would result in even greater losses. As Sarah stared at the tactical situation, something inside her finally broke free. The strange phenomena she'd been experiencing her entire life suddenly exploded into something much larger. Every electronic system in the command center began responding directly to her thoughts. She could feel the entire fleet's communication network as if it were part of her own nervous system. Without conscious decision, Sarah reached out through the ship's communication array and began coordinating the trapped vessels. Her consciousness expanded across multiple star systems, analyzing thousands of variables simultaneously. She could see solutions to tactical problems that no human mind should have been able to process. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Zhang's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah tried to answer, but she was no longer entirely present in the command center. Part of her awareness was distributed across the fleet's computer networks, simultaneously controlling communication systems, navigation computers, and tactical displays on dozens of ships. She began issuing movement orders to the trapped vessels, coordinating their actions with a precision that seemed impossible. Ships began moving in perfectly synchronized patterns, maximizing their combined firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. Supply ships delivered resources exactly where they were needed most. Damaged vessels received repair instructions that allowed them to continue fighting when they should have been disabled. The tactical display in the command center showed the trapped human forces beginning to break free from the Zephyrian encirclement. What should have been a massacre was becoming an organized fighting withdrawal. Ships that had been helpless minutes earlier were now working together like components of a single massive weapon. Every person in the command center was staring at Sarah, who sat motionless at her workstation with her eyes closed. Data streamed across her displays faster than human eyes could follow. Her hands weren't touching the controls, but the systems continued responding to her commands. "Admiral Morrison to Command Center." The ship's communication system crackled. "I need to know how those trapped vessels are coordinating so effectively. Our communication systems show no command signals being transmitted." Zhang looked at Sarah, then at the other staff members. "Sir, I believe Coordinator Martinez is somehow interfacing directly with our computer networks. I don't understand how it's possible, but she appears to be controlling multiple systems simultaneously." Through the ship's external cameras, the command center crew could see the battle unfolding outside. Human ships were moving with impossible coordination, anticipating enemy attacks and responding with perfect timing. It was as if someone was playing a complex strategy game rather than fighting a desperate battle for survival. Sarah's coordinated withdrawal continued for 3 hours, gradually extracting the trapped human forces from what should have been certain destruction. By the time the last human vessel reached safety, nearly 90% of the trapped personnel had been rescued, a result that military analysts would later describe as impossible under normal circumstances. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace and left the system behind, Sarah finally opened her eyes and returned fully to her own body. She looked around the command center where every person was staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to fear. Did everyone get out safely?" she asked weakly. Zhang nodded slowly. "Martinez, what exactly did you just do?" Sarah tried to explain, but she didn't have words for what she'd experienced. For 3 hours, she'd been simultaneously conscious in dozens of locations across multiple star systems. She'd processed tactical information faster than any computer system humanity had ever built. She'd coordinated complex military operations through direct mental interface with electronic networks. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just wanted to save everyone." Unknown to Sarah or anyone else in the command center, every moment of the battle had been recorded by multiple camera systems throughout the fleet. The footage would soon make its way to the highest levels of human military command, where it would raise questions that no one was prepared to answer. What was Sarah Martinez? How had a seemingly ordinary supply coordinator managed to coordinate a military operation that should have required dozens of specialists working with advanced computer systems? And most importantly, were there others like her? The footage took 3 days to reach Earth High Command. During those 3 days, Sarah found herself confined to medical quarters aboard the Determination while doctors ran every test they could think of. Blood samples, brain scans, genetic analysis, psychological evaluations, none of them revealed anything unusual about her biology. According to every medical instrument available to humanity, Sarah Martinez was completely normal. But the tactical recordings told a different story entirely. General Harrison, the Supreme Commander of Terran Defense Forces, watched the footage for the 4th time in his secure briefing room. Around the conference table sat the most senior military leaders in human space, along with representatives from the Science Council and intelligence services. Everyone had the same expression of bewildered amazement. "Play segment 7 again," Harrison ordered. The holographic display showed Sarah sitting motionless at her workstation while data streamed across multiple screens faster than human eyes could track. In the background, tactical displays showed dozens of human vessels moving in perfect coordination through a complex battlefield. The timestamp indicated this impossible coordination had continued for over 3 hours. "Dr. Chen, your analysis?" Harrison addressed the lead scientist from the Human Research Institute. Dr. Chen cleared her throat nervously. "General, based on the data patterns we can observe, Coordinator Martinez appears to have been simultaneously interfacing with communication networks spanning multiple star systems. The processing power required for this level of coordination exceeds our most advanced quantum computers by several orders of magnitude." "Is she human?" asked Admiral Stevens, the fleet commander who'd originally requested Sarah's reassignment. "Genetically, yes. Her DNA shows normal human markers with no unusual variations. But something in her brain appears capable of directly interfacing with electronic systems in ways we don't understand." General Harrison leaned back in his chair. In 3 years of war against the Zephyrians, humanity had learned to adapt quickly to new realities. But this was beyond anything they'd encountered. "What do we know about her background? Family history? Childhood? Education records?" Intelligence Director Walsh opened a thick folder. "Sarah Martinez, born on Earth 28 years ago. Parents were both civilian logistics coordinators, nothing unusual in their backgrounds. She attended standard education programs and performed well, but not exceptionally. No record of unusual incidents or abilities until recently." "Recently?" "We've been reviewing her service record more carefully. Several colleagues reported that electronic systems seemed to work better when she was around. Equipment failures were rare in her work areas, but everyone attributed this to her being careful and methodical." Harrison studied the tactical footage again. During the battle, Sarah had coordinated the actions of 47 different vessels while simultaneously managing supply deliveries, communication routing, and damage assessment across multiple star systems. It was the kind of task that normally required a full command staff supported by advanced computer systems. "Have we identified others with similar abilities?" Dr. Chen shook her head. "We're reviewing personnel records looking for similar patterns. But so far, Coordinator Martinez appears to be unique. However, the abilities she displayed suggest this might be a latent human capability that emerges under extreme stress. Or," Admiral Stevens interjected, "she might be one of a kind." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Sarah's abilities were unique, humanity had just discovered they possessed something the Zephyrians couldn't have anticipated. But if her abilities were latent in other humans, it could change the entire nature of the war. "General," Dr. Chen continued, "there's something else you need to consider. The way Coordinator Martinez interfaced with our computer networks, it wasn't just faster processing. She seemed to understand the systems intuitively, making connections and seeing patterns that shouldn't be apparent to human cognition." Harrison nodded grimly. "Recommendations? We need to bring her to Earth for comprehensive testing, and we need to begin screening other personnel for similar capabilities. If there are others like her, we need to find them." "What about Martinez herself? How is she handling this?" Intelligence Director Walsh consulted his notes. "According to the medical staff, she's struggling to understand what happened. She remembers the experience but can't explain how she did it. She's requested to return to normal supply coordination duties." General Harrison almost smiled at that. After demonstrating the most advanced human cognitive capability ever recorded, Sarah Martinez wanted to go back to managing shipping schedules. "Denied. Martinez is now classified as a strategic asset. Arrange immediate transport to Earth Research Facility 7, and I want a complete communication blackout on this entire incident until we understand what we're dealing with." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a research complex buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. The facility was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Laboratories filled with equipment she couldn't identify. Staffed by scientists who asked questions she couldn't answer. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the project director, had been studying human cognitive enhancement for 20 years. She'd volunteered to lead the research into Sarah's abilities because the implications fascinated her. "Sarah, I want you to try something," Dr. Warren said during their 5th testing session. "We're going to connect you to an isolated computer network, nothing that can access external systems. I want you to try interfacing with it the same way you did during the battle." Sarah sat in a chair surrounded by monitoring equipment while technicians made final preparations. "Dr. Warren, I still don't understand what happened. I can't just turn it on like a switch." "I know, but stress and urgency seem to trigger your abilities before. We're going to try replicating those conditions in a safe environment." The test began with Sarah attempting to solve increasingly complex logistical problems using the isolated computer network. At first, nothing unusual happened. She worked through the problems methodically, using standard computer interfaces to analyze data and generate solutions. But as the problems became more complex and time pressure increased, something began to change. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her consciousness expanding beyond her physical body. The computer displays around her began showing information she hadn't specifically requested. "Dr. Warren," Sarah said quietly, "it's starting to happen again." The monitoring equipment showed Sarah's brain activity spiking to levels they'd never recorded in human subjects. But more importantly, the isolated computer network began performing operations at speeds that should have been impossible with its hardware limitations. "Sarah, can you describe what you're experiencing?" "It's like I can feel the electronic systems as if they're part of my body. I can sense data flowing through the networks and I can direct it without using the normal interfaces." Dr. Warren watched in amazement as complex calculations appeared on multiple displays simultaneously. Sarah wasn't typing or using any physical controls, but the computer systems were responding to her thoughts as if she were directly connected to their processors. The test continued for 2 hours before Sarah finally disconnected herself from the network and slumped back in her chair, exhausted. "How do you feel?" Dr. Warren asked. "Tired, but also more myself, somehow. Like I was holding back my whole life without realizing it." Over the following weeks, Dr. Warren's team conducted dozens of similar tests. They confirmed that Sarah could interface directly with electronic systems through some mechanism that didn't involve any known physical processes. Her brain showed no unusual electrical activity, no electromagnetic emissions, no quantum field fluctuations that could explain her abilities. But the abilities were definitely real and controllable with practice. Meanwhile, military personnel from across human space were being quietly screened for similar capabilities. The testing was disguised as routine psychological evaluations, but the real purpose was to identify others who might possess latent abilities like Sarah's. The screening program identified 43 candidates who showed minor signs of enhanced electronic intuition, but when tested under controlled conditions, only 3 demonstrated abilities approaching Sarah's level. Even then, their capabilities were significantly weaker and less versatile. Dr. Warren briefed General Harrison on their findings via secure communication. "General, we're dealing with something unprecedented in human evolution. Sarah appears to represent a new form of human consciousness, one capable of direct interface with information systems. Is it natural evolution or something else? That's what's puzzling. Genetically, she's completely normal, but the timing is suspicious. These abilities emerged during the war against the Zephyrians, almost as if humanity is adapting to meet the technological challenge they represent. Harrison absorbed this information. Doctor, in your professional opinion, could we train others to develop similar abilities? Unknown. We're trying. But Sarah's level of capability may be unique to her specific brain structure. However, the other candidates we've identified could potentially be enhanced through training and practice. As Sarah's testing continued, reports from the front lines brought disturbing news. The Zephyrians had analyzed the footage from Operation Breakthrough and were adapting their tactics accordingly. They'd begun using electronic warfare systems specifically designed to disrupt human coordination abilities. It was clear the Zephyrians recognized that humanity had developed something unexpected, and they were working to counter it. Sarah, Dr. Warren said during a strategy meeting, we need to discuss your role in the war effort. Your abilities could give humanity a significant advantage, but only if we can figure out how to use them effectively. Sarah had been expecting this conversation. For weeks, she'd been isolated in the research facility while people she'd never met decided her future. She understood the implications of her abilities, but she also understood the personal cost. Dr. Warren, I just want to serve humanity in whatever way helps us survive this war, but I need to understand what I'm being asked to do. The military wants to integrate you into a new type of combat unit. Instead of coordinating supplies from a safe location, you'd be placed directly in combat zones where your abilities could coordinate entire fleets in real time. Sarah considered this. The idea terrified her, but she'd seen the casualty reports from recent battles. Human forces were being systematically outmatched by Zephyrian technology. If her abilities could save lives, she had an obligation to use them. What about the others who tested positive for similar abilities? They'll be trained to work with you. Think of it as a new kind of command structure. Humans who can interface directly with our technology to achieve coordination levels that match or exceed Zephyrian capabilities. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned vessel Prometheus, humanity's first ship designed specifically to support enhanced human cognitive capabilities. Around her, 12 other personnel with varying degrees of electronic interface abilities worked at specialized stations that responded to thought as much as physical input. The Prometheus was heading toward the Kepler system, where Zephyrian forces had established a major staging area for attacks on human colonies. Instead of the massive fleet Operation Breakthrough had required, this mission would be attempted by a single vessel with a crew that could potentially outperform traditional command structures. All stations report ready, announced Captain Rodriguez, who had volunteered to command the experimental vessel. Martinez, are you prepared to begin coordination protocols? Sarah nodded and closed her eyes, extending her consciousness into the ship's systems. Immediately, she felt the familiar sensation of expanded awareness. She could sense every system aboard the Prometheus, engines, weapons, life support, communication arrays, all responding to her mental commands. But this time was different. The other enhanced personnel were interfacing with the ship's systems as well, and Sarah could feel their consciousness joining with hers. Together, they formed a collective awareness that was more than the sum of its parts. Entering Zephyrian-controlled space, reported the navigation officer. Through the ship's sensors, Sarah perceived the Zephyrian fleet before it appeared on visual displays. 23 vessels arranged in a defensive formation around a massive orbital platform. Under normal circumstances, a single human ship would have no chance against such a force. But the Prometheus wasn't operating under normal circumstances. Beginning attack run, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the collective decision of the enhanced crew. What followed was unlike any battle in the history of human spaceflight. The Prometheus moved through the enemy formation with impossible grace, anticipating Zephyrian attacks and responding with perfect timing. Every weapon fired with maximum efficiency. Every maneuver served multiple tactical purposes simultaneously. The Zephyrians found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to predict their actions before they made them. Their advanced technology meant nothing when their opponents could process tactical information faster than their computers and respond with inhuman coordination. The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the entire Zephyrian fleet had been destroyed, and the orbital platform was under human control. As Sarah disconnected from the ship's systems and returned to normal awareness, she realized that humanity had fundamentally changed. The war against the Zephyrians had forced human evolution to accelerate, producing individuals capable of matching or exceeding alien technological advantages. She was no longer completely normal, and she never would be again. But perhaps that was exactly what humanity needed to survive in a galaxy where being normal wasn't enough. The footage of the Kepler system battle would soon reach Earth, where military analysts would struggle to understand how a single human vessel had defeated a force 20 times its size. The answer was simple enough. Sarah Martinez and her team represented the next stage of human development. They were still human, but they were also something more, bridges between biological consciousness and electronic systems, capable of thinking at the speed of light and coordinating actions across vast distances. They were humanity's answer to the Zephyrian technological advantage, and they were just the beginning.